Good day everyone, this is your Sir Balo, and for this video I'm going to discuss a new lesson topic which is entitled Methodology Conceptual Database Design. Now, before that, before diving into the definition of what is a conceptual database design, so which is also part of a methodology, design methodology. So, I'm going to explain first muna. What is design methodology? No. So, when I say design methodology, it's a structured approach that uses procedures, techniques, tools, and documentation aids to support and facilitate the process of design. So, when I say structured approach, kaya nga sinabi siyang, it was mentioned here that it's a structured approach, no? When in design methodology, because you're following a certain procedure, and you are using some techniques and tools and documentation aids in order to design, to facilitate the designing phase of in designing your database. Malik, in the next few slides, I'm going to explain, or we're going to tackle what are these procedures, the techniques and tools, as well as some documentation that we will going to rely on, para ma-achieve natin to, this designing of the database. So, in a design methodology, it consists of phases, each containing a number of steps that guides the designer in the techniques appropriate at each stage of the project. So, what it means is, and our design methodology, in designing a database, so meron tayong tatlong phases. I already mentioned there are three phases, which I will show you late in the next slide. So, merong iba-ibang phases or stages, no? And bawat stage, it has steps na i-follow natin. Okay? Now, here it is. Ito yung the database design methodology. And there are, as I mentioned a while, it has three phases. So, as mentioned also, each phase merong steps. It has a series of steps na we're going to follow, and the result of that would be a design of a database. And there are actually three different designs na we need. And actually, sunod-sunod sila. And each, for example, itong sa logical at sa physical, you cannot design the logical database design, the logical design of your database without going or without designing yet the conceptual design of your database. And so is the physical database design. You cannot make a physical design if hindi mo pa na-achieve tong logical database design. So yeah, again, in the database design methodology, it consists of three phases: the conceptual, the logical, and the physical database design, which is conducted, ginagawa itong this database design once we are done with the requirements collection and analysis phase of our database system development lifecycle. Or pwedeng software development life cycle. Kasi when you are designing a application, could be a mobile or web or desktop application, there are two things naman na you are designing for the application. Ano yung maging itsura ng app, no? Ano yung saan mo ilalagay yung mga buttons, what would be the color of your interface, ano yung magiging font, etc. And on the other hand, also, which is kasabay din no sa pag-design ng application, is yung database din. So this go hand in hand. They are done together, or in other cases, this is conducted first. You design the database first, then kung ano yung outcome dito, you throw it back here in the application design. So basically, yung basis mo on designing the application will depend on ano yung naging output dito sa database design na stage sa life cycle. And it's also worth noting here itong database management system selection, kasi in order to design your logical database, this is the time or the stage you need to choose what type of database are you going to use, no, that would be suitable, no, naaakma, babagay, that would meet the needs that was specified in the user requirement specification here. So there are many databases out there. We have for relational databases, we have the MySQL, the Postgres, we have the SQL Server. For non-relational, let's say we have hierarchical or document-based type of databases. We have MongoDB, Firebase, and as for the network type of databases, we have the Neo4j. Yeah. So again, this is the phase that you need to decide na kung anong database yung pipiliin nyo. So if relational, iba yung magiging output. The output of this logical database would be a relational database design. Kung network design siya. Network database design. So on and so forth. Okay. Now, moving on, the design process is divided into three main phases, as mentioned a while ago: conceptual, logical, and physical database design. Now, let's go to the conceptual database design. Okay, so I'm going to explain to you briefly kung ano mangyayari here on the first phase of the design of our design methodology. So in the conceptual database design, you are basically constructing the conceptual data model of the enterprise. No? Kaya tinawag siyang conceptual database design kasi you're still creating a conceptual data model pa lang. No? And when you say conceptual data model, that is independent. No? Yung pag-design mo, paggawa mo ng data model, conceptual, no? It doesn't depend, or you're not thinking the implementation details. So, let's say for example, we have the following implementation details. Let's say for example, targeted database management system here. As you're designing the conceptual data model, you're not thinking pa kung anong database yung gagamitin nyo. No? Hindi nyo pa, you're designing na a database, pero hindi pa kayo naka-decide, or you're not considering pa what database you're going to use pa. And also have application program, programming language. So you're not thinking pa on anong programming language yung gagamitin sa web app, sa mobile app, sa desktop app nyo. No? You're not taking into consideration pa yung hardware platform, kung anong klaseng computer ilalagay yung database server nyo. So yun, these implementation details are not yet taken into consideration while you are designing your conceptual data model. So yan yung basically ibig sabihin nitong independent yeah. Okay, so next we also have the logical database design. Again, these are just overviews so that you have an idea what's going to happen. In the next lesson, we're going to talk about in detail itong logical database design. But for now, we will discuss in detail the first phase pa lang, conceptual. So in the logical database design, it maps the conceptual data model so onto a logical model. So yeah, again, as I mentioned a while, you gotta create a logical database design kung wala ka pang conceptual data model. So once you have the conceptual data model, you're going to map it according to the target database na you have already selected. No? So kung relational model yung pipiliin nyo, let's say you want to represent your data into tables, no, rather than a tree or as a network. So yun, yung output mo rin sa logical model would be in table format. In tables. No? May mga relationships, there are foreign keys and primary keys. So ganoon. Some other database types don't have that primary key, foreign key, no. So ganoon. Okay, and the logical data model is a source of information for the physical design phase, providing the physical database designer with a vehicle for making trade-offs that are very important to design of an efficient database. So, yeah, you cannot create a physical design kung wala ka pang na-design na logical data model din. But in some cases, no, during the physical design, then if there's something na parang na-realize mo that you really need to physically implement, that could also affect the logical data model. So I guess the logical data model and the physical design model, they are codependent to one another. Hindi lang yung physical design is dependent lang sa design ng logical data model. It's also vice versa. Yeah. And here we have the physical database design. So it's a process of producing a description of the implementation of the database on secondary storage. So yun, this is basically just to give you a short idea kung ano mangyari dito. This is the time that you're going to describe na talaga how you're going to implement your database physically. So you already have selected, most likely na mayroon ka nang napili nitong logical, let's say for example, relational yung pinili mo na type of database. So this is where the stage that you specify how you're going to store the data, no? How you're going to organize the files, what are the indexes that you need in order to achieve the efficient access, and what are the other integrity constraints and security measures na you need to implement. So yun, those factors kasali na yon upon designing the physical database design. Okay, so now that you have a basic idea of the three main phases of the design methodology, database design methodology, no, to be specific. So let us move on to the conceptual design steps. So in order to create or build the conceptual data models, which is ito yung pinaka main goal natin in this phase, no? So the first step is to identify the entity types, the relationship types, the attributes, no? You identify the attributes and you associate them kung saan ba siya na entity or relationship type na belong, no? And then the attribute domains. So what are the range of values na accepted sa about for each attribute, no? And also you're going to determine what are your candidate primary and alternate key attributes. So by the way, when I say alternate keys, these are keys na hindi mo pinili as the primary key. So once you have selected uh, the difference between alternate and the candidate key is yung candidate key is these are keys the potential pa lang na maging primary key mo. So hindi ka pa nakapili ng primary key. So once you have selected among the candidate keys a primary key, the remaining candidate keys will now become a alternate key. So yeah. And step 1.6, consider use of enhanced modeling concepts. So if there's a necessity to introduce enhanced modeling, no? And that's an optional step because in not all cases the applicable to. So kung let's say simple lang yung requirements lang ng na database nyo, so this you might skip this. But again, in some cases, this is necessary. Okay. So we have the step 1.7, which is to check the model for redundancy. And then 1.8, validate the conceptual data model against user transactions. Now, later on, once we reach the step 8, I will explain ano ba yung ibig sabihin ng user transactions. By the way, what you're hearing right now is our noises ng pusa. Kasi we have a baby na pa ng mga pusa dito. Anyway, moving on, we have step 9, review the conceptual data model with the user. So, in this step, it is already assumed na you're finished na with your conceptual data model. And yung gagawin mo na lang dito is to pakita mo yung design mo sa users. To check if tama na ba yung paggawa mo sa conceptual data model. If hindi, so you're going to repeat the other steps that was mentioned. Okay, so let us begin with the first step. So the first step in building a conceptual data model is to determine and define the main objects. And these objects are what we call the entity types, as you already discussed in the first lesson. No, there are different two types of entities. We have the physical and the conceptual type, no? So yeah, I won't be discussing this in detail much. Kung ano yung mga additional na mga mention dito, that's what I'm going to explain. And if you are have forgotten what are the concepts that were explained, no? So kailan ko na lang go back to the first lesson. Now, one method of identifying entities is to examine the user requirement specification. Yes, document, no. And from the specification, we identify the nouns or noun phrases, as mentioned. The next in the first lesson, no, nouns and noun phrases that are mentioned. So, for example, staff number, staff name, the address, rent, number of rooms. Now, not all nouns and noun phrases are actually entities. Some of these could be mga properties or qualities, no? And therefore they should be considered as an attribute, no, rather than as a entity. So we also look for major objects. So aside from looking for nouns and noun phrases, when you say nouns or noun phrases, syempre these are just people, places, concepts, interest, no? So excluding those nouns that are merely qualities of other objects. Okay, although we do include them initially sa list, no? But eventually we will exclude those nouns na identified natin, and we're going to include lang only those major objects, or people, places, things, uh, the physical type and the conceptual type of entities. And then after that, once you have done your part, no, you're going to document the entity types that you have identified, no. So as entity types are identified, no, na nalista mo na-identify mo nahanap mo na kung ano yung mga entities sa user requirement specification, you assign them with names that are meaningful and obvious to the user, no. And then record the names and description of entities in the data dictionary. So by the way, sige lang, meron akong ipapakita in the next slide. That is an example of the data dictionary. If possible, no, document the expected number of occurrences of each entity. No. If an entity is known by different names, no, because there are instances na there are an entity is mentioned in different ways, no. For example, yung employee and staff, they could be the same thing, no, paras lang sila. So yeah, the names are referred as synonyms or aliases. So those aliases should also be recorded in the data dictionary. So basically, just to recap everything, the names and description of the entities, the expected number of occurrences of each entity, as well as the alias of that entity, you're going to document that and into a data dictionary. So here is an example of data dictionary. So as mentioned, the entity names, the description, the alias, the occurrences, all of those that I mentioned a while, you put that into a table format, and yeah, meron ka ng data dictionary for your list of entities. Oh. So yeah, when you say occurrence, no, we have an example no, sa staff. Alias niya is employee. So basically, staff and employee, when it is mentioned in the user requirements, they're just the same thing, no. So each member of staff works at a particular branch. And as for the property rent, yung occurrence niya, each property has a single owner and is available at one specific branch. So yeah, you're already familiar with this one. Basta makabasa ka ng ganito na sentence, you already know instantly this is an occurrence, and I should put this into the dictionary. Okay, so moving on with the next step is to identify the relationship types, or the relationship. Ano yung mga relationships na meron between the entities, no? And which entities have relationships, and what kind of relationship meron sila. So yeah. So we can use the grammar of the requirements specification to identify relationships. So typically, they are indicated by verbs or verbal expressions. So you're already familiar with this one. I already mentioned this in the first lessons. So, yun. Kung yung entities, nouns or noun phrases, to identify relationship types, you just look for verbs and verbal expressions. So here's an example of a relationship. So staff manages property for rent. So in this first example, no, I'm just going to in this first example, we have two entity types na identified. We have the staff and the property for rent. Then we have here the verb manages. So itong verb, automatically, this is a relationship type. So therefore, we could also say that staff, there's a relationship between the staff entity and the property for rent entity, and manages yung yung relationship type niya. And same also with here in this second example, private owner owns property for rent. These are the two entities. This one right here is our relationship type. And the last one here, okay, property for rent, lease. These two are our entity types. So, sorry. And this one right here at the between, no, associated with. So this is a verbal expression, a verb. So therefore, this is a relationship type.